the .NET applications will be able to connect to a particular data source. So I will take you through the ADO.NET framework, and this one is a class of different objects that will be able to allow us to be able to create or to connect a certain .NET application to the database. So allow me to take you through the theoretical part of the ADO.NET framework. Then we shall try to see how we can be able to create the connection once you have been able to define a certain database. We are not able to look at .NET and database into length because this one is our last class, number 1, and there's a lot you can be able to do regarding the .NET and the database. So because of time, we are not able to look into depth, but we will be able to cover the most important things about the .NET and the database systems. So allow me just to continue with the presentation for the theory part, after which we will look at how we can be able to implement that one in a practical environment. So I have said it's not chapter 1, it's supposed to be our last chapter, I think chapter number 7, that is .NET and database systems. And our key learning outcome is we need to be able to understand how a .NET application, and that application could be a mobile application, could be a Windows application, could be a form-based application, could be a console-based application, how we can be able to connect that application to a data source. In this case, the data source could either be the SQL or MySQL server database, could be MySQL database, could be the Oracle database, could be a database like Access, could be a database like XML. So that's what we want to be able to see. How can we be able to do the connection of the application or of our .NET application with a certain data source? So we look at the introduction to the .NET framework and the ADO. Actually, let me just call it ADO, not just database. So you can just allow me to edit the slide and a minute, please. Introduction to ADO. ADO.NET. So this one first is an evolution of a technology from the previous technology. The previous technology for Microsoft for connecting to the database was something we call the active data object. And that's what the initial for ADO means, the active data object. But when you talk about the ADO.NET, it means that this one, it's going to be the same frame, or it's the same technology, but this ADO will now be running on top of the .NET framework. So we simply say that the ADO.NET framework, it's actually a framework, it's a technology from Microsoft .NET framework that will provide you, or that will provide someone, or a developer, or a programmer, so that we can have a communication between your .NET application and either a relational or a non-relational data source. And this framework or this set of technology will have some set of components. We look at those components, and we should also be able to see at what point do we use those components. Actually, the ADO.NET framework is actually a set of different classes. And from those classes, you can be able to determine whether you are defining a connection, whether you are executing a certain statement in your relational or the non-relational database. So it's simply a set of objects or classes that will be exposed by the .NET framework or by the .NET environment. And these classes will be language independent. Sorry, will be language independent. It doesn't matter what language you are programming with. Whether you're using C#, whether you're using Visual Basic.NET, whether you're using F# or Python, provided that language you're using can be able to take advantage of the .NET framework, then you can be able to have access to those objects. You can be able to have access to those classes which are being exposed by the .NET framework. So let's maybe at a glance look at the ADO.NET framework components. So from this side, sorry. So from this side, you should be able to see your .NET application. You could be creating a web-based application like the one we have been doing from day number 1, the ASP.NET application. That's a web application. You could be doing a Windows application or a Windows Form application, what we call the standalone application. You could be doing a console application, let's say like the ones the kind of programming language you do in C and C++, whereby we don't have some graphical user interface, are the ones we call the console-based application. Or any other, for example, you could be doing a mobile application, you could be doing an AI application, or whichever other application you are writing. But on the other hand, you do have your database. And as we have said, .NET will be, or ADO.NET will be supporting a number of data sources. You can have maybe an SQL Server database. That is a database that we have been able to define using the Microsoft SQL Server. And actually, the Visual Studio will have the native support for the SQL Server. Sorry. So the Visual Studio environment usually has the native support for SQL Server, meaning that once you install your application, or once you install the .NET application, sorry, the Visual Studio environment, an instance of the Microsoft SQL Server will also be installed on that machine. You don't need to install an SQL Server Management Studio. And this one will become clear once we start doing the example. You could also be connecting your application to a certain data source we call Oracle. So if, let's say, you have an Oracle database, then the .NET framework can also be able to support that. Your database could also be object linking DB. For example, a good example will be something like Microsoft Access. So if you want to be able to connect your .NET application with a database like Access, which uses a driver we call the OnlyDB, then that one will also be supported by the ADO.NET framework. You could also be using another provider, which we call the Open Database Connectivity, the ODBC. So if that's the case, then you should also be able to connect your .NET application so that that application can be able to talk to your data source, maybe do some updates and get some data from the DB. And we can have some other sources. For example, .NET has some support for XML data source. So you can define an XML data source, and you are able to connect that XML data source to your .NET application. But each of that database will be having its own corresponding driver. If, let's say, I'm using the SQL Server, then I need to be able to have this namespace, because this namespace will be the one that contains all the objects that I can be able to use when I'm using an SQL Server object. So if I'm going to be using the SQL Server, then on my file, I need to be able to import system.data.sql client at the top. That namespace needs to be present within your application. If, let's say, I'm using the Oracle driver, then I need to have the system.data.oracle client. Very simple. If, let's say, I'm creating my application using the OLEDB, or I'm connecting to an OLEDB database, like, let's say, Microsoft Access, then the namespace I need to be able to have will be the system.data.OLEDB. And lastly, for the ODBC, then I need to be able to have this namespace. And all these providers will be able to expose to you a number of objects. One of the objects that will be exposed will be what we are calling the connection object. The connection of the object will be able to allow you to connect to a certain database residing in a certain server. When we start creating the .NET applications, the first thing we are going to be establishing will be the connection. And on the connection, we are going to specify the name of your server, the name of the database you are connecting to, the username of the person who's supposed to log into that database, and maybe password, if any. We also do have the command object, which will also be found in the provider, or which will be found in the provider object. And the command will be used to execute some SQL statements. If you want to be able to execute a certain SQL statement so that maybe you can be able to do an update to the database, then we can be able to use the command object. And I think this one will also become much clearer once we start doing some of the practical examples. Another object that will be also exposed by all these providers will be the data reader. A data reader will be a database object, or will be an ADO.NET object that will allow you to be able to read records in a forward mode and read only. So you can maybe assume that you have a large chunk of data and you want to read from the first record, then you keep on moving forward. Then at that point, you shall be able to use what we call a data reader. The data reader can only be able to move forward. You cannot be able to go to the previous, or you cannot be able to go to the previous record. Once you are positioned at the first record, you can only go to the next record. And we'll also do some few examples using the data reader if the time shall be there. But it's a very important object when you are dealing with a database. So the data adapter, it's also another object that will be exposed in your database or in your provider. And this one will allow us to be able to execute or to be able to do some kind of updates to the database. For example, you want to do an insertion, you want to do some deletion, you want to be able to maybe, let's say, delete some record in the database. That one can be done using a data adapter. Still again, this is something we'll be able to look at. And if at all we get time, I'll show you how we can be able to use a data adapter in our project. Then we look at what we call the data set. And a data set will simply be a cache of the records we have in the database. So yes, we do have the physical database, but we can fetch the physical records from the database and cache them in a certain memory location. In ADO.NET framework, the component that will be able to allow us to cache that data or the records from a certain data source, it's what we call a data set. But let's look at each of these objects one by one. But if someone could be having a question, you can ask at this point before we move on. Any particular question before we proceed with the slide? Okay, so we can move on. I said we'll take some few examples. Possibly we should be able to do some kind of a connection to the database before the day ends. We should also be able to query our database before the day ends. still have some people coming very late for the class. So let's just proceed with these objects. We look at each one or each component one by one. So this is like or it's like an extended, or it's an extended view of how the ADO.NET components look like. As I've already said, you can be able to do a Windows form application. We can do web form application, and we can also be able to do some other kind of applications. And for all this one, the data provider, we said it's going to expose 4 main objects. That is the adapter, the command, the data reader, and the connection. As the diagram suggests, it's the connection that will be able to enable us to be able to connect to a certain data source. And by data source, we mean the connection object will enable us to be able to connect to a certain database, which could be Oracle, which could either be SQL Server, which could be MySQL, or any other kind of database we want to be able to make connection to. The data reader, we said, it's supposed to allow us to be able to read records in a forward mode, and it's read only. Once you are positioned at the first record, you can only be able to move to the next record, and we cannot be able to move to the previous record. That's the work of the data reader. Then we do have the command. We said the command will allow us to be able to execute a certain SQL statement. For example, when you say select all from customers, then that one will be the text of that particular command, and that will be the work of the command. It's going to allow us to execute the SQL statements. The adapter will allow us to be able to execute some updates on the database. And when we are executing the updates, this one will be done, or we shall be able to do that through the data set. We said the data set will be a cache or a cache of all the records we have in our physical database. So instead of storing all the records within the database, in ADO.NET framework, there's a way we can be able to cache the records within an object which we are calling the dataset. And through the adapter, we can be able to execute some queries. For example, the select statement, we can also do the insert, the delete, and the update statements. Then at the top, we are saying you could be creating a Windows form application, or an application that will be running on a standalone environment. We could also be doing the web forms, the ASP.NET applications, or you could be doing a mobile application, a console application, or any other kind of application you can be able to do in .NET or in this environment. So we can now move through each component one by one, and we see how we can be able to use those components. So let's see how the .NET, just a minute, I can hear some students who are joining very late still. So let's see how the ADO.NET works. And we do have 2 modes. It's either the connected mode or the disconnected mode. The connected mode will be more faster in performance, since we shall work in a forward way only. That means it's a read only, and once we position the cursor on the first record, we can only be able to move to the next record. We can't go to the previous record. On the other side, the disconnected mode will be quite low in speed and performance, because in the disconnected mode, that's where we shall be having the adapter, and we can be able to do insertions, we can be able to do updates, we can be able to do the deletions, and also selecting the data. But in the connected mode, we are just trying to go record by record until the last record in a read-only manner, but we can't go through the previous record. On the connected mode, we can be able to add data, or we can be able to add data of a single table. That means you cannot be able to have when you are trying to query data in a connected mode, you cannot be able to query data from more than one table. But in a disconnected mode, where we are using the data set, then we can be able to query, or we can be able to add data from more than one table. So in connected mode, we are only talking about a forward read-only object. And that's where we shall now be using the SQL reader. But in the disconnected mode, we can be able to read data in all different, or in any dimension. That means you can be able to go forward, you can be able to go previous, you can do updates, you can delete, you can also select. But in connected mode, we are only talking about one thing. We can only be able to read the records going forward, but those records will be read-only objects. So a good example of the connected mode is the data reader. And one thing about the connected mode, which I never said, it's for you to be able to use the connected mode, then your connection to the database and server should always be open until you have been able to fetch all the records. Once you just close the connection to the database, then there's no way you can be able to fetch more records from the database. So anytime we are talking about the connected architecture, then have the illusion that the connection has to be open for us to fetch all the data. And a good example is what we are calling the data reader. Another example of the disconnected mode is what we are calling the dataset object, which uses the disconnected architecture. And this one will get all the record at once. Then after we get all the record, then we can be able to close the connection, and the data will now be available after the connection is closed. So just see the two differences. One, the connected mode, the database, or the connection to the database should be open for us to fetch the records from our database. In the disconnected architecture, then we open the connection, fetch all the data. Once we fetch all the data, then we shall now close the connection, and we can even be able to access those records even after the connection has been closed. And that's why I said from the beginning that the data set will be a cache, or a cache of the records we have in the database, meaning that we don't need to have an active connection to the DB. We can still be able to manipulate the records. We can still be able to display the records while the connection is closed, because the records will be in the dataset, not in the actual database. So any person could be having a question before we proceed on to the next item.
Mr. Kioko?
Yes, Raphael.
These two modes, are they only available for .NET, or they apply to all databases?
Oh, okay, I'm not very conversant. You know, .NET is a framework, so I'm not very conversant with the other modes. I'm not sure whether the others apply the issue of the connected architecture and the disconnected architecture. Most of them, what I know, they apply the connected architecture. First, you have to open the connection. Then after you open the connection, you can now fetch the records. But in .NET, this component of the dataset that has been brought across that will enable you to read the records. Then you can be able to get the records from the dataset instead from the actual database. So I'm not sure whether I'm aware of any other framework or any other architecture that applies this.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know about PHP, you have first to open the connection, read the records, then after you read the records, you can now close the connection.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
okay. Thanks for the question, Rafael.
Thank you for answering.
Okay. So we move on to the data provider and the data set. And these two are the most key components in the ADO.NET framework. The data provider, or we do have three major providers, although I'm not ruling out that we can have another provider. One will be the native support, and that is the SQL Server data provider. And obvious, the fact that Visual Studio is a Microsoft product, it's going to be supporting by default the Microsoft SQL Server, and we shall be able to have a provider we call the SQL Server data provider. The other provider will be the object linking or the object linking embedded database provider, the OLEDB. So the OLEDB will be used for a database like Access. So if you are connecting your your .NET application to a data source like Microsoft Access, then we shall be using a provider we call the OLEDB. If let's say you are using the open database connectivity, then we shall be having a provider we call the ODBC data provider. But for this tutorial or for this class, we shall be using the native support of the provider, the SQL Server data provider. And for each of that provider, then we shall be having 4 objects which provide functionality of the data provider. One is the connection object, which will be connecting us to the physical server and the database. Next, we shall be having the command object that will allow us to execute a certain command or a certain SQL statement in the DB. We have the data reader. The data reader will allow us to be able to read records as we move forward. Then we do have the adapter. The adapter will be able to allow us to be able to query or to be able to do some kind of updates to the database. For example, you want to insert records, you want to select records from the database, you want to update records, you want to delete records. That one will be done via an object we are calling the data adapter. And we said the data adapter will be present in an object we call the dataset. So we look at this in a few minutes. I just hope we shall have that time, or that time we need for us to be able to look at all these objects. So we look at the connection object. The connection object will be a unique session within a data source. And it's that object that will be able to handle the physical connection between your .NET application, maybe that which you have written using C#, that which you have written using Visual Basic.NET, or any other framework, or sorry, any other language with the data source. The data source could be Oracle, could be Microsoft, could be the Microsoft Access, or any other data source you are using. So let's look at the connection string format, because the connection object will be using a connection string, and that connection string will contain a number of useful properties. So this is how the connection string looks like. So we define a variable we are calling the connection string. And number 1, the connection string will have a data source. This data source will be the server whereby we have our database hosted in. If you find maybe the data source will be on the local machine, then the server name will be the local host. The initial catalog will be used to define the name of the database. So on the connection string number 1, we define the data source that will contain the server name. The initial catalog will now define the name of the database you are connecting. The user ID will be identifying which user in the database is supposed to be able to connect to that database or access to that database. Because once you create a certain database, you need to be able to authenticate which person will be able to access that database. And at this part, that's what we are going to be specifying, the actual username of the person who is supposed to access the DB. Then lastly, we have a password. That will be the password which this particular user should be able to use to access that database on this particular server. So the data source, the initial catalog, the user ID, and the password are the 4 main properties you will be able to find in the connection string. And we are saying the connection string will be able to connect us, or will be able to connect the .NET application to our data source. I think this one will become very clear once we have done an example in a minute. Just a minute. So we look at the command object, and we said the command object will be used to execute structured query language statements, and also you could also be executing stored procedures against the data source specified in the C# connection object. Definitely there are some SQL statements you want to be able to execute. Either you want to be able to do an update to the database, or maybe you want to be able to maybe select some statements in the DB, or there's something else you want to get from your database. If you want to be able to do those execution, then they will be done using the command object. But for us to be able to execute those objects, we do need an instance of the connection object. I'll just show you in a minute how we create an instance of the connection object, because the connection object is actually a class in .NET. Once you have a class, you're supposed to be creating an instance of that class, and that's what we call an object in object-oriented programming. So when we are using the command object, then we shall be able to pass an instance of that connection object. This one will become very clear in a minute once you have done the practical example. But please note that the command object will be able to allow us to be able to execute a certain SQL statement. So this has 2 major properties. Number 1, it's what we call the command text. A minute. Just a minute. Sorry for that. So we have said that it requires the connection object, and I should be able to show you how we pass the connection object to the SQL object. Once that has been done, there are 2 major properties associated with the command. Number 1 will be the command text. The command text will be able to tell us what SQL statement are we executing on the server or on our database. If it's going to be a select statement, that's what we shall have on that property. Then we also do have something we are calling the command type. The command type could either be we are executing a stored procedure, or we are executing a normal table. And we might be able to use the 2 properties, or we might combine them in one certain line. But once we have done the or once you have done some sample code, that will enable us to connect to the database and maybe do some updates to the database, then this one will become clear. But the command text will be able to contain those SQL statements you are going to be executing on your database, while the command type will be able to tell us what kind of commands or what kind of SQL statement are we executing. Are we executing a stored procedure, or are we executing the normal select statement? So the other object is what we call the data reader object. And as we said from the word or from the beginning, this is going to be a data provider object that will enable us to be able to read the records, but in a forward way only. You cannot be able to go to the previous record. And we are also going to be retrieving the records in a read-only way from the data source. So we cannot be able to do an update using the data reader. So if you are using the data reader, maybe we have some kind of records, and on these records, maybe you want to be able to read from the first record, second record, until the last record. But it's not that you want to do an update to that data. That one will not be possible. If you want to do an update to the data, then we shall be able to use the adapter. Something else about the data reader cannot be, or we cannot be able to instantiate a data reader. And this one will also become very clear once you start writing our program. So you cannot be able to use the keyword new, maybe a certain maybe constructor, when we are using the data reader. All the other classes, we can be able to create an instance, but this one, we can't have an instance being created with the data reader. Maybe once you have done the example, this one will also become much clearer. But remember, we are reading the records in a forward mode. The records will all be in a read-only mode, and we cannot go to the previous record when we are using the data reader. And I think we have looked at the three major objects that we shall be using. So now we can be able to create a database, and we now begin using the four objects. I might be able to use the adapter. I might be able to use the data set, so that you can be able to know at what point do you use the adapter, at what point do you use at what point do you use the adapter, at what point do you use the data set. So allow me at this point, having looked at the theoretical foundation of the .NET framework, to now look at how we can be able to make the physical implementation of what we have just gone through. Unless someone could be having a question. So I will share the environment where we have been writing our programs. And on the current project, I'm going to add a new item. Just a minute, still loading. So let me just add project, add item. Hello, class. Just give me 1 minute. There's something I'm sorting on the phone. Give me just 1 minute. Okay, class, we can continue. Sorry for that disruption. So I hope you can see my Visual Studio and window on your side. So what we are going to do, I'm going to add another web form, a web form with the master. So I can call this one database, then click on add. Select my master page, that is demo.master, then click on OK. Just a minute, the environment is just setting up. So there's something we are going to do on this environment that, number one, we need to be able to create our data source. And since we have said that we are using the native database that comes with the Visual Studio, then there's a folder on the project that we call the app data. And that's where we create the database in. So let me just take you through the procedure of creating the database. Right click on that folder, click on add, and you add a new item. Then you'll be able to get four options. You can add an SQL Server database, a text file, an XML file, or an XML schema. So in this case, we want to add an SQL Server database, and I'll give it the name. For example, let me call it stock. So let's assume that this is going to be a database that will be keeping the stock we have in our database. Then click on add. So we give it some time, depending on how fast your machine could be. It could load within a flash of a second, but oops. So you should be able to see that this a certain database that has been created on this folder, which we are calling the app data. So I click on this one and open the database. So after you open the database, just a minute. So after you open the database, on the Server Explorer will be able to give you the connections you have on the DB. So you should be able to see the name of the database, and you should also be able to see, sorry, let me just refresh this environment. So we do have the data connections. Don't know why it's not having the exact name. Open. So we do have the database connection and just the name demo, but on the database, we have a number of objects. For example, you can be able to add some tables for your database. You can also be able to add some views, some stored procedure, functions, and many other kind of objects that you want to have on the database. I said you don't need to install the SQL Server Management Studio. Once you just install the Visual Studio, then it comes up with an SQL Server will be installed on your local machine. So I want us to create a certain table. So I right-click this table, then that can give it some time. Then we add a new table and give it. Still, we give it a lot of time. Sometimes they can load fast, sometimes they could be slow, and this one entirely depends on your machine. So let's just give it some time to load the service where we shall be doing the interface for that application. So there we are. Sorry. So this one, the first column will always be known as ID, and it's going to be your primary key. So let's assume that since this is a table for products, the product will be uniquely identified using the product name. And the data type for the product name, we can say it's a variant character, varchar maybe of, sorry, a variant character of like 50. Then we can also have another column like product name. This one will also be of type variant character, varchar, we can say 50. This one, if a certain column allows null, we can check it. If it doesn't allow null, then we can uncheck it. So since we can't have a product that doesn't have a product name, we uncheck this. Next, we have the price of the product. And this one, we can say it's of type double. So we should be able to get double somewhere. Or we can just say decimal, no problem. And every product should be able to have a price. Then we have the quantity of the products in the database. This one, maybe it's going to be an integer because it doesn't have some space int. And every product should also have quantity. Then lastly, we can, we can now be able to have maybe the reorder level, although it's not a must. reorder level. And for the reorder level, we can say, for example, once this product gets to a certain level, then we are supposed to replenish the stock. We are supposed to order the stock. So the reorder level will also be an integer. So we have int as the data type for that column. And every table, or sorry, every particular product should be able to have the reorder level. Then I can now uncheck this. Once you are okay that that's the table you wanted to create, down there you'll be able to see an SQL statement has been generated for you, and you can give the product an appropriate name, products or product. Then once that has been done, there's an option for update the database. So click on that and it's going to run the query, preparing the update statement. Let's give it some time. So it's still taking the old name of the database. Don't know why that's the case, just a minute. So update this. The database should not be, we want to give it the name product. So let me just click on update. So we have that, and the table name will be that. Then we click on update. So you can see it has finished updating. If I just refresh my Server Explorer, you should be able to see we do have a table that is known as product that has been created. And if you expand this, you should be able to see we have the product name. Sorry, this one was not supposed to be product name. This one was supposed to be product code. Sorry. So let's try to open the table definition. Sorry. And we change this particular column. Sorry, this one was, let me delete this. I think there's an error somewhere. We are not supposed to have. The first column was supposed to be product code, not name. That's what I want to change. So we have product, prod code. And then I update the statement again. Then update the database. So once I refresh the schema again, then I should be able to see, yes, that column has actually changed the name. If let's say you have the SQL Server Management Studio, then that database, you should be able to see the database we are working up with. So you don't need to have, or you don't need to install that SQL Server Management Studio. So next, what we are going to do, we have now done the first table. Let's assume that I want to add another table. Right-click, then add a new table. And I can give this table the name customer. So this one, the ID will be customer number, or cast number. Customer name, cast name. Maybe the email of the customer. Mobile number. You can assume that it's possible that a customer doesn't have a mobile number. So we also have maybe the gender of that customer and the country where the customer comes from. Let's just have those columns. So the customer number becomes my primary key, and it's going to be an integer. The customer name will be a variant character, varchar of 50. Email, the same thing, or it can also be of type text. So it's text. Mobile number, it's of type integer, int. Gender will also be of type character, variant character of 50, although those are very many digits. Varchar of 50, and the country will also be of type text. Then once we are done and we are okay that the right table we wanted to have, we can now update our database. Then click on update, and you can see the update has been successful. If I just refresh the database, I should be able to see I do have another table which I'm actually calling customer, with the customer number being my primary key. Now, what we are going to do, we are going to design an interface that will allow us to be able to insert records about either a customer or a product. Maybe before we move on, are we together, class? Are we together, class, before we proceed with the class?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. No, sometimes you could be speaking to yourself without your knowledge. So we open the table or that ASP.x file that we call the database, and let's just design a symbol interface that will allow us to capture information about the customer. So get the toolbox. So we have a label, and we just do quite a number of them. Label, another label, and on this one we can have a text box. So let me just drag a normal text box. One, another text box, another text box, another one, and we can have a button that we shall call save. So button. So let me have this button, which we'll use to click for us to save the records. So we have the text box, we can give them appropriate name. So this one will be for product code. Product code. Sorry, that's not the ID. It's supposed to be the text. Product code. Product name. The price of the product. Product price. And we also do have the reorder level. Then I think there's something I've forgotten. We need to have them. We need to have them quantity. So label. So let me just drag this label and get a text box. Then quantity. And this one we can say this is a button for save records, because we just want to update our DB. So btn save. Sorry, txt quantity. Txt order level. Txt price. And we have txt. So we have txt p name and txt p code. So now what we will do, we will now try to connect our application to the data source which we are having. So already we have the database. We have been able to design the interface, but we want to be able to connect our application to a certain data source. So either you can define a class, and this class will be used for storing your connection to the DB, so that you don't need to keep on creating a connection every time, or you don't need to keep on writing the same code over and over again every time you're connecting to the database. But for now, I'm going to go to the click event. On the click event, that's where I'm going to start creating the connection. So first, create the connection object. Connection object. And since we are using the SQL server, the connection object will be SQL connection. Then I give this, or this is a class, which I'm going to create an instance of the class, which I'm going to call con, or whichever name. Then we create an instance of the same class, new SQL connection. But already you can see we have a lot of errors in the program. The beauty with Visual Studio, once you just make an error and put the cursor on the top, it's going to tell you exactly what could be the error. So for us to be able to see what the error is, it's saying the type or the namespace SQL connection could not be found. Are you missing a certain reference? If I just click on show potential fix, then it's going to tell me exactly what I need to be able to import. I need to import the system.data.sql client.connection, or I need to import this using the system.data.sql client, because sometimes you don't know what kind of namespace you're supposed to be having within your program. So I'm going to click this, and it's going to be imported at the top using the system.data.sql client, and that one has just cleared our error. So you don't need to keep on mastering, or you don't need to keep on mastering out the connection object or what particular namespace you're supposed to be maybe having on your program. Once you just right click, it's going to give you some options, and you can be able to select from those options to resolve the error. Next, I'm going to declare a string connection string, called con string. We said the work of the connection string is the one that's going to, or the connection string will be the one that will be able to link us to the database, the server, and we are also going to be specifying the password and the username. So where can I get the connection string to my database? If you go to the Server Explorer, go to View, Server Explorer, then you just right-click your database and go to Properties. You'll be able to see the connection string. It's just there. It's a property. It's actually this one. So I'll just copy this. The connection string is already there. So I copy that and paste it on this variable. So you don't need to know the exact connection string, how it looks like. Once you right-click the database, go to Properties. You'll see a property we call the connection string. Get the value and assign it to this variable we are calling the connection string. So that's how the connection string look like. And it seems we have some kind of an error somewhere. So it's demo app data stock something. Just a minute. Yes, that one solved the error. So by just adding the @ symbol at the beginning, that one will now be able to solve your error. And we now have our connection string. The only error we are getting is because this variable, which we are calling the connection string, has not been used in our database, sorry, in our application. Anytime you create the new instance, so equals new SQL connection. The SQL connection will be able to take two overloaded methods. Number one, we can have a method. We can have a method. One method doesn't take any kind of parameter at all. The second one, it's a method that will be able to take the connection string, and the connection string should be of type string. And actually, we do have that variable that is holding our connection string. So I just need to pass that variable to this constructor, which we are calling the connection string. The third one is whereby we are going to be passing the connection string, SQL credentials. But now, since we don't have the credentials to the SQL, the credentials will mean the username and the password. We can just pass our connection string, which is con string. The con string, it's con string, not connection string. Con string. This is a small s. So, sorry. So we have been able to pass that connection string. Class, are we together before we move on, so that I don't start losing students with the database part? Abigail, are we together? Yes, Felix.
Excuse me, sir. I'm
Yes.
a bit lost concerning the connection string. You say that
Yes.
you have to right-click the database,
Yes.
then
So
you go to the properties. So
yes.
my question is, where is?
Okay.
Can you
Can
clarify
I go
for
back
me,
to that again?
please?
So once I go to the database, right-click the database, go to the properties. And on the properties, there's a property we call the connection string. On that property, there's a value, and that value will be able to contain the connection string to the database. You just copy and paste it.
Thank you. I've seen it.
Okay,
Thank you.
much welcome. Okay. Ambrose, are we together? Seji Ambrose, we are together. Atai Brian. Okay, I think if people have, okay, sir. So we can just proceed. So after you have been able to, after we have been able to do the connection string, that means I've now been able to make a connection to the server and my database. I need to open my connection. So next, open the connection. And for us to open our connection, we just use the name of the object open connection or dot open. It's a method. Use the connection, the open method of the connection of the connection object. Okay, so we have been able to use the open method of the connection object. And now once the connection is object, then it means we can now be able to perform some operations on the database. At this point, we can now be able to use an SQL command to tell the program what we want to do. So let me declare an instance of the SQL command, because we talked about this object, cmd equals new SQL command object. And this again will also be an overloaded method. So overloaded constructor, either this constructor can take null parameters, can also take the text of them, all that text you want to execute on the server, can also take the text and the connection to the database, can also take the text, the connection, and the type of transaction, can also be able to take the text, the connection, the transaction, the column encryption settings, and many other many other parameters. But for now, let's just assume that we just want to use the first one, whereby we are not passing any parameter. So cmd dot command text. What do I want to execute? I want to execute the following: insert into the name of my database. No, sorry, the name of the table. Let me just open the table. So that's my server. I want to work with the product. So insert into product, and we want to insert the following: the names of, product. We want to insert the following. We want to insert the product code, comma. I want to insert the product name, prod name. I also want to insert the price, comma. I also want to insert the quantity in the database and the order level, the order level. Those are the columns. The columns should be exactly as they appear within your database. Once you just have a column that doesn't conform the way it looks like in the DB, then it's going to give you some error that that column doesn't exist in your database. So do we just proceed, class? Today, I think we can just say we don't have the break, we just continue. Unless maybe you want us to do a break of 10 minutes, then we come back at 10. That entirely depends on you. So insert into product code, price, quantity, reorder level, then values. Values. So where are we getting the values from? We are getting the values from some certain text box. So number one, the product code, it's actually a variant character. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Sorry. So this will be the format of getting the values from the text box. A single quote, 2 double quotes, then a single quote. That will get us exactly the value on a certain text box. Then we can concatenate it, plus and plus. So we want to get the value on this text box, txt. Minute values, so txt. I missed something, just a minute. So insert into product code, the product name, quantity, then the values, and next we have the actual values. Then okay, that one, then plus txt. So the first one, we want to be able to insert the product code, and we are getting the product code from a text box. We are calling txt product code dot text. Then we enclose it in a double quote and a single quote. That one will enable us to get the actual values on that text box, comma. Next, we want to also get the value from this text box. We want to assign the value for the product name. So single quote, double quote, concatenation operator, txt, pname dot text. Then double quote and single. This one should also have the concatenation operator. Then we can now proceed, comma. Comma. The next value we want to insert on that table will be the price. So single quote, double quote, plus txt price dot text, plus a single quote and another double quote. Then we can proceed. The next item we want to insert will be, we have the quantity and reorder level. So single quote, double quote, plus, just a minute, single quote, double quote, then a plus, txt, sorry. I miss on something else, just a minute. Double quote, sorry, double quote and a single quote. I don't know why we just seem to be having an error somewhere. But we'll walk through the lines. Looks like there's something we have not closed as expected. So this plus is not there first. I think that simplifies that. And I think this one, single quote, double quote, then this, single quote, double quote, looks just okay. Minute. Okay. Come back to this. I don't know, that one is not, I've seen the problem. So we need to convert the price. I think from our database, if we can just cross check, the values are supposed to be exactly, the data type should be corresponding. If we look at the table definition again, the price is actually a decimal. So that means we need to convert this value to become a decimal. Just a minute. So let's convert this, convert to decimal. I think we have the decimal, yes, to decimal. All that value on that text box to become a decimal. So I don't know why we are, oh, I've interchanged this. It's the end of quote, then that quote. Yes, so the next item we want to insert will be the quantity. Don't ever change the order as they appear in your column list, because once you change, a certain column will be having a different item. So the next one will be the quantity, and this one we are going to get it from txt. Sorry, just a minute. This one we are going to get it from txt quantity dot text. And I think according to our database, this one was supposed to be an integer. So we also convert this one, convert to int32. Because in our database, we have defined that one as an integer. And the last column is the reorder level. Single quote, double quote, then a concatenation operator, txt reorder level dot text. Concatenation operator, single quote, and a double quote. And I think that marks the end of that big line. Sorry, I don't know, double quote and single quote, then a semicolon at the end. So I think that's how the insert statement is supposed to be looking like. CMD, the text you want to insert, to execute will be insert into the name of this table we are calling product, and want to insert the record we are calling the product code, name, price, quantity, and reorder level. The values are the ones we are getting from the text boxes. And I think this is obvious. While we are doing this one, we should also have converted to an integer. Convert, sorry, convert sorry, convert to insert to, because in our database, we have defined the reorder level as an integer. So there we are. And next, I think there's something just which I forgot. First thing, we give the command associate the command with the connection, because it's the connection that is connecting us to the database. So cmd dot connection should be this one, to be equals to con. So we just set the connection to equals to the connection, the con, because in our case, the con contains the connection to the database. Then we have been able to set the text. And in this case, we are executing this text once we execute that command. We also said we can also define the command type, cmd command dot command type equals to. So there are different commands. I said we can have them, we can be able to have the command being a stored procedure or a normal table. But for now, we can just leave this. We don't need that. So once that has been done, we now execute the command cmd dot execute the NaN query, because this one will be able to execute some SQL statement. So we execute the command using that inbuilt function, which we call execute the NaN query. And this one executes the command text. And our command text in this case, it's one that wants to do an update or that wants to do an insertion to the database. And maybe after the command was successful, we can just have a case whereby we inform the user that the records have been inserted. So allow me to go to the interface again and maybe have a label. So let me just add a label, view the solution, not the solution explorer, view the server explorer, and not the server, solution explorer, the toolbox. And on the toolbox, I want to add a label. So just add a label, and maybe the text of that label can just be color green, so that once we are successful in executing the statement, we just tell the user that that one was successful. So I go to font, and the font color will be color green. But that's not a must. So we can just give this label a name, LBL successful. So that's the label that will be able to tell us that either the save was successful or the save was not successful. So I go back to the code, but when the page loads, when the application just loads, we can hide the label. So LBL successful dot visible to be equals to false. So that one will not be visible when your application starts. After we execute the query, we can just say LBL successful dot text. We want to inform the user. We tell the user record saved successfully in the database. Successfully. That's enough. Successfully. Now, I think we have set up everything. We have set up the connection. We have been able to associate the command with the connection object. But after all that has happened, you need to close the connection. That's very important. After you have been able to read the data from the database, don't leave the connection object open. So we just say close the connection. If you don't close the connection, then you'll have a lot of problems once you try to open the connection again. in another place. So we can close the connection and say con dot close. So after you have done all the reading from your database, then always close the connection. So closes the current connection. So I would like us to run the program and see what we are going to get. But if there's a question on what you have written so far, please let me know so that I can be able to explain it further before we start running the current project.
So I have a question.
Yes.
It concerns with the ID.
The ID.
I've seen you several. Yes.
Yes.
I've seen you severally starting the ID with the TXT. Is it must for someone to start with TXT?
Okay, it's a convention in Microsoft that there's a certain way we are supposed to give them the text box, the buttons, a certain name. For example, a text box should have the name TXT, a button BTN, but that does not mean that if you don't give that particular control that name, that your program will not be able to execute. But it's just a common practice, so that once you see that object within your program, you can be able to know this is a text box, this is a label. But it's not going to make your program to become wrong if, let's say, I don't follow the convention. But it's better you follow the convention because it's the best known practice. It's like one best known practice is about commenting your code. It doesn't make your code to be wrong if you have not done the comments in your program. Felix.
Okay.
Have I answered your question?
Yeah. You are fun.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome. So I am just waiting for the application to start so that we see what we have on our side, because we need to be able to determine whether the code has been successful before we can be able to do something else on the project. So we give it some few more minutes to load, then we see whether we are able to insert the records. Sometimes it's not a must that once you have written the code will be error-free. But let's give this some few minutes. Okay. So we can share the output screen. So let's try to see whether we shall get the inputs. So you'll be able to see a place from, I type the code. Let's say the code will be 001. The product is Omo, or let me say let me just say it's Omo. The price is 255. The other level, once the product gets at 2 or at 5, then notify the system. And currently we have 100 of them in the database. Then I click on Save Records. So there could be some error somewhere. You can see the code has actually gone back to them. Sorry, we are not able to execute the query. You can see that. Implicit conversion from type var character, it's not allowed. Can I see where we are converting this? Just a minute. So there's something we are converting somewhere that's not supposed to be converted the way we are doing the conversion. And that's why we are not able to have the statement going through. So let me look at this. We have the product code. We have the product name, P name, P product name, price. I think price was a decimal. So we have the product code, the name, the price, quantity. There's something that's cheap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not there. Okay. Can just check from the database again. Sorry, this one was supposed to be variant character, but we specified it a variant binary. Can update it, no problem.
Mr. Kioko?
Yes. Can I share?
You're not sharing your screen.
Okay. Let me just, I was trying to look at the error where the problem could be, but let me just run the program again because I've rectified the error. So the screen is coming on. Just let's give it being just being able to come on. Let me share my screen. Sorry, it's this one. It's a tab. So again, we take the product code 001 or more. This one, the price is 255. The other level 5, 100. Then we click on insert. Just a minute. There's something wrong. Okay, I can see the insertion has gone through, but we just have some error. Let me stop sharing what we have. Sorry, just a minute. I know where the problem is. So let me just stop sharing. Then I'll show you that the update has actually gone to the database. Then I'll rectify the error with you because I've seen where we have our error in our program. So let me open the window. So we want to confirm if that insertion has gone through. There was no confirmation, and I know where the confirmation is not appearing. So if you look at the table, the product, right click, then show the data. Just a minute. Then I hope you can see from your end that there's an insertion that has gone through in our database. You can be able to see that I have been able to insert the product 1 or more 255 quantity 100, but we never got any kind of confirmation on our side. If you look at the code we are having, there's just a small bit of that code that is not logically right, and that's what I want us to rectify on. Remember, when our form started, or when the page loaded, we disabled the label, but we are now supposed to enable the label so that we can be able to see that error message. So LBL dot successful, LBL successful dot visible. We need to make it to be true so that we can be able to see the error. Otherwise, we will not be able to see that confirmation. I also want us to clear all the text. So I also want us to clear the text. So clear all the text box. So txt pcode.text, we set it just to. Nothing. That's how we clear the text. txt pname.text. Then we set it to nothing. txt price.text. We set it to nothing. And txt quantity.text. We set it to nothing. The same thing, the last one, we also do the same dot text. Let's just test the last one, then we can agree we do a short break of 10 minutes, then we come back. There's something I wanted to show you. Once we have the data in the database, how can you retrieve the data and show it on a certain level? So let me run the project again, then we can agree, maybe we go for a 10 minutes break. Then once we come back, we can do something. Or now can you retrieve data from the database and maybe display it on your application? So allow me to share the screen again. So so we now have the product number 002. This is maybe, sorry. Look like I pressed the button by mistake. I should have done those validations so that we don't have a user clicking a button by mistake, then the application just has an issue. Okay. So we have product 002. This one, let's say it's going to be fridge. Price, it's 50,000. The other level, once you get to 3, notify me. And the quantity we have, it's 15. So I click on Save Records, and you can be able to see that now we do have this message being displayed on my application, and the text box have now been cleared. They are just empty, so that I can be able to insert another record. So if we go to the database, so if I go to the database, let me share the DB so that we can see the state of the database at this time. Sorry. So we have the DB. So on the DB, we should be able to see on the Server Explorer. If I just open that table, you should be able to see the following. So if I just show the data, then you should be able to see that we do have 2 products, the Omo and the fridge. And that's how we do the insertion into the database. Very straightforward. So class, could we be having a question? Do we do a 10 minutes break? Okay, 10 minutes break. Let's come back exactly at 10:30. Maybe I'll just extend the class to around 10:45. But now at that time, we'll agree. If you want me to take you through another session on database, that's upon you to agree, then you let me know. But as far as the syllabus will be concerned on my side, then I'll have finished the syllabus. But if you want me to take you more into depth about the database, even if it's another lesson you want me to have, then I have no problem on my side. So let's have the 10 minutes break. We come back at 10:30. Okay, can we proceed with the class? Can we proceed? We need to be done by 10:45. Okay, so I will like to show you how we can be able to pull the data in the database and maybe display that data on our interface. So for us to display the data, then we shall be using something we call a data grid view control. So allow me to share my screen again. So on the same table, sorry, on the same, so we are going to drag something we call a data grid view control from the toolbox. So let me have this toolbox. Sorry, this is a data grid view control. So grid, sorry. So we can just drag and drop it somewhere. So there we are. You can also change the layout of how the grid view looks like. So let me say auto format the columns. I like the brown sugar theme, but you are always free to choose your own theme. So that's how the brown sugar will look like. But there are so many other kind of templates you can be able to use. So we have the mocha. That's how the mocha looks like in terms of columns. We have the apple orchard, clover, and many others. So let me, for example, use the clover field. Then click on apply and OK. Then I'll give this data grid view a certain name, DGV, sorry, DGV products. So when the application starts, I just want to hide that particular data grid view control. So I go back to the code, and as my application is starting on the page load. So when your page loads, then we can hide DGV product dot visible. We just make it to false. So the user will not be able to see that component. Dot false equals false. But now, once the user clicks on this button, which we are calling the btn save, then actually, let me just define a function, although it doesn't mean that this application cannot run without, it doesn't mean that my application cannot run without a method. So private void, it's a function which will get products and will not accept any kind of parameter. And first, we create a connection to the DB, get products. So I create the connection, SQL connection, what's new, SQL connection. But I can just get the code for connecting. That's why I said, actually, this code, you can just put it on, this code, you can put it on a public function or a public method, then you keep on calling that, because up to this, we are just repeating the same thing. So I just copy that and have it on, have it on this part, So first, I've been able to create the connection to the database using the con object. Then I open my connection object. Next, I create an instance of the SQL command. The next thing I will do is the command will be, the command text in this case will be, we want to select all from products. That's what we want to execute from products. Product, is it product, is it products? Let me confirm it's product. So we want to get all the columns from products. So after we get all that, then I will also set the connection of the command cmd.con and connection. And the connection will be gotten from this variable we are calling con. Someone has a question? Okay, so first we create the connection to the DB, open the connection, set the command text. But now the records which are going to be returned will be now assigned to an SQL reader. So SQL reader, then I can just call it the DR, data reader, or any name for the object we now execute the command cmd.execute the reader. So if you are going to be executing, or if you want to execute this SQL statement and assign it to this object, which we are calling the data reader, then we don't execute the NaN query. We shall execute the reader, and the results of the execution will be assigned to this variable or to this object, which we are calling the DR of type data reader. And we said the data reader will enable you to read the records from the first record to the last record, but these records will be read only. You cannot be able to do, or you cannot be able to update data on those records. Then, since we have the data grid view control, we shall now set the data source to the data reader, because the data reader contains all the records we have been able to get from our data source. So DGV product dot data source, we set it to the DR, or what the reader has been assigned to. Then we can now bind our DGV products dot data bind. It's actually a method. That means we can now be able to assign the records which have been returned to the data reader to that data grid view control. That means the data grid view control will be getting the records which have been returned from the database and stored on our data reader. So just a minute. This one, sorry, that one is supposed to be, that one is supposed to be binding the data reader. Sorry, the data grid. Now this is, I don't know, now let's close the connection, con.close, because we said every time you have to close the connection, if you don't close the connection after you have been able to read the record, then you shall have a problem with that. The fact that we say that the data reader will be a connected object, that means the connection has to be there before you can be able to read the records. You cannot close the connection before you bind the data to the data grid view control. So that's the name of my method, which I'm calling the get project, the get product. Then lastly, after I click the button, or after the records have been, or once I get this error, then I can now be able to show, just show the database records. And that one will just mean I call my function get products. So let's try to run the code. I just hope that at this point I was able to show my grid view. I think that's something I keep on forgetting. So I need to show the grid view before I call the function. So DGV products.visible, we want to make it to become true, so that I can see the records. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the records being displayed on the DGV. Or it's not a must for me to call that one in that command. Maybe we can have another command which we are calling. Just a minute. Yes. So let me just have a button which we are going to be clicking upon. View, then toolbox. So a button, This button is the one we are going to click and show the records. So this one is for show the records. Oops. It's not able to be on this part. So we can just say this is show records. Show records. Then the button is btn show records. So once you click on that button, we can just say, I'm going to be calling this, sorry, I'm going to be calling this particular code. So let me migrate that code to this part of my program. So that once I just click that button, then I should be able to see the records in my database. So I can run this.
Mr. Kyoko,
Yes, please.
the select statement.
Yes, can I go back to the select statement?
Yeah, the
Yes.
spelling is
Oh,
wrong.
okay. Can stop that. Sorry, we just have a lot that's running on the machine. So on the select statement, select all from product. So what did you say was the problem, Raphael?
The spelling of the name product.
Oh, thank you. Let's run it and see whether that function will be able to fetch for us the records in the DB. So we're still launching. So let's can share the code. So I can share the output, not the code. So on the tab, we have this one. So let's see if I click on the show records. Yeah, I think from your side, you can just see, once I just click the show record, then I'm able to get the data in my DB. So if I add another product 003, product name, this is maybe detergent. Price, it's 345. The other level 4, then the quantity will be 567. Then I save. And that one, I'm able to see that the records have been saved successfully. But now I want to pull the data in the database and show. So once I click on show records, then I should be able to see that. And there's a lot we can be able to do on database with .NET, but I want to stop at that point and get any questions from the students.
Question?
Yes.
Maybe there's something I missed, but the method of binding,
yes,
automatically allocates the table names.
The columns.
Yeah, the columns.
Yes, it allocates the columns based on how they are defined in your database.
So all you have to do is add a grid view.
Yes,
once
you add the grid view and tell it the source, and bind the grid view to that source, then it's going to get the data from the database based on what has been returned by the data source and display that data on the system, on the grid view. Yes, Rafa?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That is clear. Thank you.
Okay. So that marks the end of my morning class. I want to say I'm very much available to take you more on the .NET and database if the students feel that maybe they have that time and maybe they will like me to take them through more concepts on database, because what we have been able to do so far are very basic things. We have been able to do insertions and we have been able to retrieve data, but there's a lot you can be able to do on .NET and database. But if a certain student feel, or if the class feel maybe they need another lesson on the database and .NET, then I myself am very much available for that. I also just want to announce that the CAT will be on Saturday as we agreed upon. I don't know what time can we have this CAT? Class, what time can we have this class? Sorry, the CAT. Okay,
I think from 2
9 a.m. in the morning, 5 p.m. in the evening, 8 at night. Me, I'm very okay with anytime. I'm very much flexible. So can we meet at 11? Around Sharon. Chamoy, I can see you are raising up your hand. Felix, can you agree then you let me know the date for the CAT as agreed by the students?
It's okay. I'll let you know.
ah.